If you've ever been made to feel small, to feel invisible, then this story is for you. And if you've ever wondered what happens when a person who's been pushed too far finally decides to stop moving backward and start pushing back, well, stick around. Well, stick around. You're about to find out. My name is Ivan. I'm 75 years old, and for 40 of those years I was a union organizer. I've gone nose to nose with corporate lawyers, with strikebreakers, with men who would rather shut down a factory than give an extra dime an hour to the people who built it. I've stood on picket lines in the freezing Chicago winters and negotiated in boardrooms so hot with tension you could barely breathe. In all that time, I learned one thing that has served me better than anything else. I don't get mad. I get organized. I never thought I'd have to use that skill on my own son. But life, as they say, has a funny way of surprising you. It started with a move. My son Mark and his wife Candace had decided to chase the millennial dream to Portland, Oregon. They'd found a perfect little bungalow online, and Mark had landed a job with some tech company that sounded to me like it sold air, but apparently it paid very well. They had been living in Chicago, not 10 minutes from the house I'd lived in for 50 years, the house where I raised Mark after my wife Helen passed. They were supposed to be my support system in my old age. That was the plan, anyway. When they announced the move, they presented it as an opportunity for all of us. "Dad, you'll love it," Candace had chirped. Her voice always a little too high, a little too bright. "Think of the fresh air. The mountains. You can't stay in this big old house by yourself forever." The truth was, they needed my money to make it happen. The sale of my house in Chicago, a paid-off brick bungalow in a decent neighborhood, was the down payment on their dream in Portland. The agreement was that I'd live with them. I'd have a room downstairs, my own little suite. It sounded good. It sounded right. Helen, my late wife, had made me promise on her deathbed that I'd always look out for Mark. He was a good boy, she'd said, but he needed a firm hand, a steady guide. I thought that by helping him secure his future, I was honoring that promise. I see now that I was just a walking, talking bank account with a bad hip. The move itself was a nightmare. We were driving a 26-foot U-Haul, pulling Mark's car on a trailer behind it. Just the three of us, crammed into the cab for 2,000 miles. It was July. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the sun, and after the first day, the mood had soured completely. Every time I shifted my weight, I'd hear a sigh from Candace. Every time I asked how much longer, until the next rest stop, Mark's knuckles would turn white on the steer. "Dad, we just stopped an hour ago," he'd say, his voice tight. "My leg is cramping up, son. I need to stretch. We're trying to make good time, Dad. We can't stop every 50 miles. It wasn't every 50 miles. It was every 200. My requests were reasonable. A bathroom break. A moment to walk around and get the blood flowing back into my legs." I commented once that he was tailgating a semi. Candace turned around in her seat, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor blade. "Mark is a great driver, Ivan. He knows what he's doing." From then on, I just stared out the window at the endless fields of corn and soybeans, a prisoner in the cab of my own moving van. The things they were moving, the furniture, the boxes of memories, most of it was mine. Yet I was being treated like unwelcome cargo. The final straw came in Nebraska. I remember the sign, Kearney, the heart of Nebraska. We pulled off I-80, into the parking lot of a roadside diner called the Pioneer's Griddle. It looked like 1,000 other places I'd eaten at in my life. A little worn, a little greasy, but honest. "All right, let's get some lunch," Mark announced, though it sounded more like a verdict. Candace turned to me, her face a mask of counterfeit sweetness. "Ivan, why don't you go on in and grab us a booth? A big one. We just have to find a spot for this beast where it won't block anyone." "We'll be right in," I was so grateful to get out of that cab I almost thanked her. My knee popped as I climbed down, and the asphalt was hot through the soles of my shoes. I walked into the cool, dim diner, the smell of coffee and fried bacon washing over me. A waitress, with a tired smile, pointed me to a booth by the window. I slid onto the cracked vinyl seat and watched the U-Haul. Mark was maneuvering it, slowly, toward the back of the lot, near where the big rigs parked. I saw him get out. He and Candace stood there for a moment, talking. She pointed back toward the diner. He shook his head. They got back in the cab. I thought they were just adjusting the parking spot. I picked up the menu, my stomach rumbling. I decided I'd get the patty melt. I looked up again, just in time to see the U-Haul, not turning around, not parking. I saw it ease to the edge of the lot, pause for a moment at the exit, and then merge, with a terrifying finality, back onto the eastbound ramp of the interstate. No, not eastbound. Westbound. It was continuing on its journey. Without me, for a full minute, I didn't move. I just stared at the spot where the truck had been. My brain simply refused to process what my eyes had just seen. It was a mistake. They had to come back. Maybe they forgot something at the last gas station. But the car trailer was still attached. My car, their car, all of it, gone. The waitress came over, a pot of coffee in her hand, ready to order. Honor, or are you still waiting on your party? I looked at her. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The roaring in my ears was louder than any factory floor I'd ever been on. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She must have seen the look on my face, the sheer, unadulterated panic, because her professional smile melted away into genuine concern. "Honey, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I finally found my voice, but it was a reedy, unfamiliar thing. "My son," I whispered, my eyes still fixed on the highway. "He left." She followed my gaze to the empty road. She put the coffee pot down on the table. She looked back at me, then at the empty space in the parking lot, and then back at me. In her eyes I saw the one thing I didn't want to see. It wasn't confusion, it was pity. She had seen this before. I wasn't the first. I was just the latest. I was 75 years old. My possessions were in a truck heading for the Pacific Northwest. My son and his wife had just left me at a roadside diner in the middle of Nebraska because I complained too much. The betrayal was so absolute, so cruelly efficient, it was almost brilliant. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had erased me. And in that moment, sitting in a sticky booth with the smell of stale coffee in the air, I felt a despair so profound I thought it might actually stop my heart. The waitress, her name was Darlene, was my first angel. She sat down across from me, her expression a mixture of hardened sympathy and weary anger. "Happens more than you think," she said, her voice low. "They get tired of it. The money, the time. I don't know, the burden." She said that last word with a sneer, as if it tasted foul in her mouth. She got me a glass of water and told me to just sit for as long as I needed. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock it. I called Mark. Straight to voicemail. "Mark, it's Dad. You left. At the diner. I don't understand. This has to be some kind of mistake. Call me. Please, just call me." I tried again, voicemail. The third time, the call didn't even go through. It just beeped and disconnected. He had blocked my number. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a cruel joke. It was the plan. I felt a hot wave of shame wash over me. I was a problem that had been neatly and efficiently solved. Discarded. The union man, who had fought for the dignity of thousands of workers, couldn't even command the basic decency of his own son. I thought of Helen. Her last days, her hand in mine, her voice weak but firm. "Take care of our boy, Ivan. He's got a good heart, but he gets lost sometimes." Don't let him get lost. I had failed. I had let him get so lost that he was capable of this. Or maybe I was the one who was lost all along. Maybe I never really knew him at all. For a long time, I just sat there, the world reduced to the four corners of that booth. Darlene kept my water glass full. She didn't press me. She just let me be, a silent sentinel in a pink uniform. Finally, around dusk, a man who had been sitting at the counter, a big guy in a trucker hat and a worn denim jacket, came over to my table. "Heard what happened," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My name's Gus. I'm heading east, all the way to Chicago. If you need a ride, you've got one." I looked up at him. He had kind eyes, etched with the lines of 1,000,000 miles of highway. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering solidarity. It was a language I understood. I didn't have a better plan. My other option was to become a ward of the state of Nebraska. "Thank you," I managed to say. "My name's Ivan." "I know," he said. "Darlene told me." The ride with Gus was long and quiet at first. The cab of his Peterbilt was his home, clean, organized, with a small bunk behind the seats. The rhythmic hum of the engine was a balm. For the first 100 miles, I just stared out the window as the sun set over the plains, my mind a churning mess of grief and disbelief. Gus let me have the silence. He just drove. Finally, somewhere in Iowa, he spoke. "You want to talk about it?" And it was like a dam breaking. I told him everything. Not just about the diner, but about the years leading up to it. The slow erosion of my relationship with Mark. It started small, after he married Candace. She had a way of framing my help as interference, my advice as criticism. When I gave them the down payment for their first condo, Candace had called it a family loan, but there were never any payments. When Mark's ridiculous startup, selling artisanal shoelaces, went under, I was the one who bailed him out, paying off the vendors, so he wouldn't have his name ruined. I did it because he was my son. I did it because I had promised Helen. She always thought he was fragile. I told Gus, the words tasting like ash, that the world was too harsh for him. I guess I believed it too. So I tried to be his shield. Every time he stumbled, I was there to catch him. I paid off his credit cards, co-signed for cars he couldn't afford. Last year, they lived in my house, for 8 months rent-free, after Candace decided her job as a brand synergist wasn't fulfilling her spiritual needs. I bit my tongue. I cooked their meals. I did their laundry. All because I'd made a promise to a dying woman. I remembered one specific incident, about 6 months before the move. I'd come home to find my old leather armchair, the one Helen had bought for me for my 40th birthday, missing from the living room. When I asked where it was, Candace gave me that bright, brittle smile. "Oh, Ivan, it was so old and shabby. It just ruined the whole feng shui of the room. We put it out on the curb. Someone picked it up within an hour. Isn't that great? A new family gets to enjoy it." I had just stood there, speechless. That chair was where I'd sat with Mark on my lap and read him stories. It was where Helen and I would have our coffee every morning. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a part of our life, and they had thrown it out like garbage. When I tried to explain this to Mark, he just sighed, exasperated. "Dad, you're being so dramatic." It was a chair. Candace was just trying to help freshen up the place. "Why do you have to find a problem with everything?" That's when I should have known. That was the moment. The disrespect wasn't just casual. It was strategic. It was a campaign to diminish me, to reduce me from a father to a landlord, from a family member to an obstacle. But I didn't see it. I just remembered Helen's voice, "Take care of our boy." And I'd swallow my anger and tell myself it wasn't worth the fight. It wasn't about revenge then. It was about keeping the peace. It was about keeping my promise. Gus listened to all of this without interruption. He just nodded, his eyes on the road. When I finally ran out of words, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Let me tell you something. Ivan, there's a difference between a shield and a doormat. A shield protects someone. A doormat just gets walked on until it's worn out. You weren't protecting him, you were enabling him. And his wife, she just taught him how to wipe his feet." He was right. The simple, brutal truth of it hung in the air between us. All those years I thought I was being a good father, honoring my wife's memory. In reality, I had been paving the road to that diner in Nebraska with my own good intentions. I had taught my son that there were no consequences for his actions, that Dad would always be there to clean up the mess. And the one time I became the mess, he just drove away. We arrived in Chicago just before dawn. The city was quiet. Gus pulled up in front of my house. My house, it looked wrong, empty. The curtains were gone from the windows. A pile of junk mail was on the porch. I knew before I even put the key in the lock what I would find. They had been thorough. They'd had movers come while I was, I assume, packing my own small suitcase for the trip. They had taken everything of value, the good furniture, the television, the silverware Helen's mother had given us, even the rugs. They left behind the junk. The broken lamp, the stained mattress in the guest room, a few boxes of old papers in the basement. I walked through the echoing rooms, my footsteps loud in the silence. They had stripped my life for parts. I ended up in my old study. They'd taken the desk, but they'd left the built-in bookshelf. And on one shelf, they'd missed something. It was a framed 8 by 10 photo of my old Union Local 347. It was taken in 1988, right after we'd won a 17-week strike against a plastics company. There I was, 30-something years younger, arm in arm, with a bunch of tough, smiling, dirt-smudged men. We were exhausted, but we were victorious. We had faced down a giant and made it blink. I sank to the floor, leaning against the empty wall, and just stared at that picture. I saw the faces of men who had lost their homes, whose cars had been repossessed during that strike. Men who ate at soup kitchens to feed their families. But they didn't break. They organized. They stuck together. They knew that one person alone is a victim, but a group of people, united, is a force of nature. And that's when the grief, the shame, and the despair finally burned away, leaving something else in their place. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in years, a cold, clean fire in my belly. It was resolve. I wasn't some feeble old man to be discarded. I was Ivan, the man who had organized Local 347. My son and his wife thought they had solved their problem. They thought they had left me for dead on the side of the road. But they had forgotten who I was. I don't get mad. I get organized. And my new project was just beginning. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice. And I was going to build a union of the forgotten. The first few days were a blur of logistics. I had my wallet, my phone, and a nearly empty house. Gus had refused any money for the ride, just shaking my hand and saying, "Give him hell, Ivan." I used my credit card to get the utilities turned back on under my name and order a cheap mattress and some groceries online. The silence in the house was a physical presence, a constant reminder of what had been taken. But with each small act of reclaiming my life, the resolve hardened. My first battlefield was the internet. I'm no tech wizard, but I know how to be methodical. I sat on a folding chair in my empty living room with my laptop, and I started to search. I used phrases that shamed me to even type. Family abandoned me, elder abandonment, children stole my money, granny dumping. The screen lit up with a shadow world I never knew existed. It was a silent, sprawling graveyard of broken hearts and stolen lives. There were forums, forgotten blogs, and private Facebook groups filled with stories that made mine look like a simple misunderstanding. I read about a woman in Arizona whose daughter had convinced her to sign over the deed to her house for estate planning purposes, and then immediately taken out a reverse mortgage, maxed it out, and disappeared. I read about a man in Pennsylvania whose sons had put him in a nursing home, sold all his prized possessions, a lifetime collection of rare books, to pay for it, and then used the rest of the money to buy a boat. The visits stopped the day the bank account was empty. Their stories were a chorus of quiet suffering. These people weren't complaining online. They were whispering into the void, hoping someone might hear them. They were isolated, ashamed, and convinced they were alone. I knew that feeling. But I also knew the first rule of organizing. You find the other people who are whispering, and you teach them how to shout. I joined a few of the larger, more active private groups. For a week, I just read. I learned the patterns, the financial manipulation often disguised as help, the slow, deliberate campaign of isolation, the final shocking act of betrayal. Then I wrote out my own story. I was concise, factual, and I stripped out most of the emotion. I described the U-Haul, the diner in Kearney, the blocked phone number. I posted it in 3 different groups. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was like I had lit a flare in the dark. Hundreds of comments poured in. This happened to my father. My sister did the same to our mom. They leave you with nothing and expect you to just vanish. But more than the comments, it was the private messages that got my attention. People who were too afraid to post publicly started reaching out. Their stories were harrowing. I identified 36 of the most compelling, most egregious cases. I created a private encrypted chat group. I invited them to join. My message was simple. My name is Ivan. I was a union organizer for 40 years. I believe our individual stories are tragedies, but our collective story is a scandal, and scandals get attention. If you're tired of being a victim, let's talk. 28 people joined within 24 hours. We held our first video call that Saturday. It was a Brady Bunch grid of wounded faces from all over the country. There was Arthur, a retired accountant from Dallas, a meticulous man whose daughter had used a forged power of attorney to sell his ranch. There was David, a former history professor from Vermont, whose son had drained his retirement account to fund a cryptocurrency scam. And there was Margaret. Margaret was a retired high school English teacher from Sarasota, Florida. She was sharp, witty, and had a core of steel that her children had somehow mistaken for frailty. Her story was a masterclass in modern cruelty. Her son and daughter had convinced her she was becoming too forgetful to live alone. They'd found a wonderful assisted living facility for her. They'd held a sad, performative farewell party. The day after she moved in, they put her beautiful beachfront condo on the market. The facility, it turned out, was a state minimum dump. The food was inedible. The staff was overworked and indifferent, and her children's phone numbers suddenly stopped working. They were paying for her stay with her own money, siphoning off the rest from her investment accounts, which she had foolishly given them joint access to. During that first call, Margaret was the one who crystallized our purpose. After listening to a dozen stories of heartbreak, she adjusted her glasses and looked into her camera. I taught Shakespeare for 30 years, she said, her voice clear and strong. And what I'm hearing, in every single one of these stories, is a line from King Lear, how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child. We have all been bitten by the serpent. We can sit here and bleed in private, or we can find some anti-venom. That was it. That was the spark. I took the lead, falling back on old instincts. I laid out a plan. We weren't going to sue. Lawsuits were expensive, slow, and private. The outcomes were often sealed. Our children were counting on our silence and our shame. They were counting on the messiness of family disputes to keep their secrets safe. Our goal wasn't to get our money back. For many of us, it was already gone. Our goal was to create consequences. We needed to take their most valuable asset, their public reputation. We called ourselves the Left Behind. We started pooling our resources, not just the modest funds we could scrape together, but our knowledge. Arthur, the accountant, started guiding people on how to track the financial paper trails, how to access bank records and property deeds. Margaret, the teacher, helped us draft clear, powerful written testimonies. My job was strategy. We're a union, I told them on our second call. Our product is the truth, and right now, the market is completely unaware of this product. We don't need a lawyer, we need a salesman. We need a public relations agent. There was a stunned silence. This was beyond anything they had considered. Arthur was the first to speak. A PR agent. Ivan, what are we going to tell them? That we're a bunch of old people whose kids ripped them off. They'll laugh at us. They won't, I said firmly. Because we're not going to sell them our sob story. We're going to sell them a national exclusive. A silent epidemic. A story about the dark side of the American family. It's got greed, betrayal, and heartbreak. It's a guaranteed headline. Arthur, using his accounting skills, found us a young, ambitious PR firm in New York, run by a woman named Chloe. She specialized in what she called narrative justice campaigns for nonprofits and underdog causes. We pooled our money. Some sent $100, some sent $1,000, and hired her for an initial consultation. We all got on the video call. Chloe was young, sharp, and looked like she drank coffee for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She was skeptical at first. I could see it in her eyes. She thought we were just a bunch of cranky old folks with family grudges. I let Margaret speak first, then Arthur, then a few others. They told their stories, simply and powerfully. I watched Chloe's face change. Her professional detachment slowly dissolved, replaced by a look of horrified fascination. When it was my turn, I didn't tell her my whole life story. I just gave her the facts. My son and his wife left me at a diner in Kearney, Nebraska, during a cross-country move, paid for by the sale of my house.
No!
They continued on to Portland with all my possessions in the back of the truck. They blocked my number. My story is not unique. It is one of thousands.
No!
We are the collateral damage of our children's ambition and entitlement. We are calling it the silent epidemic of granny dumping, and we want to put it on the front page of every news site in the country. Can you sell that story? Chloe was silent for a long moment. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a kind of predatory focus I recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had just stumbled upon a winning ticket. "Mister," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that's not just a story. That's a 6-part Netflix series. But we'll start with a major news magazine. We're going to need a face for this campaign, a central story to anchor the piece. I think it should be you, Ivan. The diner in Nebraska, it's cinematic, it's visceral. Are you willing to be the face of the Left Behind?" I looked at the faces of my new comrades on the screen. I saw their fear, but I also saw their hope. For the first time in years, they weren't alone in their quiet rooms. They were part of something. A union. My union. "Yes," I said, "but on one condition. You use all our stories. I'm the hook, but they are the headline. And I want my son's name in the article, and his picture." It wasn't about revenge. That's what I told myself. It was about accountability. But as I said the words, I felt a flicker of something cold and satisfying deep inside me. Maybe it was about revenge after all. And maybe after everything, that was okay. The plan was in motion. The machine was built. Now, all we had to do was turn it on. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in organized patience. Chloe, our PR agent, was a whirlwind. She was worth every penny we'd scraped together. She crafted a pitch that was irresistible, framing our stories not as individual grievances, but as a disturbing social trend. She had contacts everywhere. Within a week, she had a bite. A big one. Sarah Jenkins, a senior feature writer for Nexus, one of the most respected online news magazines in the country. Jenkins was known for her long-form, deeply researched human interest pieces that often went viral. She didn't just report the news, she created it. Sarah was no pushover. She conducted a series of long, grueling interviews with me over Zoom. She was empathetic but forensic in her questioning. She wanted dates, times, locations. She wanted to know about my relationship with Helen, about Mark's childhood, about my career as a union man. She was building a portrait not just of a victim, but of a life. Then she interviewed Margaret, Arthur, and a half-dozen other members of the Left Behind. She fact-checked every claim, cross-referencing our stories, looking for inconsistencies. She was a professional, and our story was holding up to her scrutiny. This was a crucial phase. Our credibility was our only weapon, and Sarah Jenkins was testing its strength. Meanwhile, I lived a strange Spartan existence in my empty house. I bought a few cheap pieces of furniture, a coffee maker, a small television. I reconnected with some of my old union buddies, men I hadn't seen in years. I'd meet them for breakfast at the same greasy spoons we'd frequented for decades. I told one of them, a tough old steelworker named Frank, the whole story. He just shook his head slowly, a chunk of sausage on his fork. Kids today, Ivan, he'd said, they got no spine, no loyalty. They think family is something you can just opt out of, like a newsletter subscription. It felt good to be validated by people who understood the meaning of solidarity. During this whole time, there was nothing but silence from the West Coast. Not a single word from Mark or Kenny. In my darker moments, I imagined their relief. They had done it. They had excised the inconvenient old man from their lives. They were in their new bungalow in Portland, decorating with my furniture, living their perfect curated life, and I was just a bad memory, a problem they had successfully solved. I imagined them thinking I was probably in some state-run facility, or maybe even dead. The thought that my disappearance brought them peace was a special kind of poison. Then came the request from Sarah, the journalist. Ivan, I need a photograph, she said during one of our calls. A recent one, of you with your son and daughter-in-law. Something that shows the family you thought you had. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly the photo she needed. It was from the previous Christmas. Candace had insisted on a family portrait in front of the tree. I was in the middle, on a dining chair. Mark stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder, a broad, confident smile on his face. He was wearing the expensive cashmere sweater I'd bought him. Candace was beside him, her head tilted just so, her arm looped through his. We looked like the perfect family from a department store ad. Happy, prosperous, loving. It was a complete and utter lie. I found the digital file on my old computer. Looking at it felt like staring at my own ghost. The man in that picture had no idea what was coming. He was a prop in their performance. With a shaking hand, I attached the file to an email and sent it to Sarah. As I hit send, a profound sense of finality washed over me. This was the point of no return. I had spent my life fighting for fairness, for a level playing field. It had never been about retribution. But looking at that smiling, treacherous face of my son, I had to admit to myself, this time it was different. It wasn't about revenge, until I realized they felt no remorse. Until I understood they truly believed they had done nothing wrong. Then it became about revenge. It became the only language they might understand. A week later, Chloe called me. Her voice was electric. It's done, Ivan. The story is filed. It's going live next Tuesday. It's the lead feature in the Life and Culture section. Sarah did an incredible job. The headline is Left Behind, the Silent Epidemic of Granny Dumping. She paused. Are you ready? Was I ready? I had been abandoned, erased, and left for dead. I had clawed my way back, not with anger, but with organization. I had found an army of the forgotten, and given them a voice. I'm ready, I said. The great silent machine we had built was about to be switched on, and I knew it would be very, very loud. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray Chicago dawn. I woke up early, made myself a pot of coffee, and sat in front of my laptop in the quiet of my still bare living room. At 6 a.m. sharp, an email notification chimed. It was from Chloe. The subject line was just a single word: Live. I clicked the link. The Nexus magazine website loaded, and there it was. Spanning the top of the page, a professionally designed banner with a haunting photo of an empty chair in a desolate room. And the headline, in bold, stark letters: Left behind, the silent epidemic of granny dumping. My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled down. The first paragraph was about the loneliness of old age. The second was about the social contract between generations. And the third began: For Ivan, a 75-year-old retired union organizer from Chicago. The end of that contract came at a roadside diner in Kearney, Nebraska. Sarah Jenkins had woven my story, Margaret's story, Arthur's story, and a dozen others into a seamless, devastating narrative. She detailed the financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, the cold, calculated cruelty. She quoted sociologists and elder law experts. It was comprehensive, it was damning, and it was utterly, undeniably true. And then I saw it. Right below the section detailing my abandonment at the Pioneer's Griddle was the photograph, the one from Christmas. There they were, Mark and Candace, smiling their perfect false smiles for all the world to see. The caption underneath read, Ivan's son Mark and his wife, Candace, who according to Ivan left him at a roadside diner and drove to their new life in Portland. My name, his name, her name, the photo, it was all there. I felt a tremor run through my body, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The bomb had dropped. What happened next was an avalanche. Chloe had done her job well. She had preceded the article with influencers and advocacy groups. Within an hour it was trending on Twitter. By noon, it was the most read story on the Nexus site. The comment section was a roaring inferno of outrage and support. Thousands of comments poured in. People shared their own stories. Children of aging parents wrote about their fears and duties. Grandchildren wrote about their love for their grandparents. The epidemic was no longer silent. It was screaming. Members of the Left Behind shared the link across their own networks. Margaret's friends and the Retired Teachers Association blasted it out to their entire membership. Arthur's contacts in the financial world saw it. We had created a firestorm. The first call came at 3:15 p.m., an unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. I answered, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm. Dad, Dad, it was Mark. But it wasn't his usual calm, condescending voice. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. What have you done? What did you do? I said nothing. I just listened. I sent you to voicemail one time, and you do this. The article. Everyone at work has seen it. My boss called me into his office. He showed it to me on his computer. Candace is getting texts from people we haven't spoken to in years. You have to take it down. You have to call them and tell them it was all a lie. You were confused. Tell them that. Now, he was babbling, hysterical. The confident man who had coolly driven away from that diner was gone, replaced by a terrified boy who had been caught. I let him scream until he was gasping for breath. The silence stretched. Are you done? I asked, my voice as calm and flat as the Nebraska horizon. What do you mean? Am I done? You're ruining my life. No, Mark, I said, and the words felt like they were forged in ice. I'm not. I'm just telling the truth about what you did to mine. There's a difference. You have to fix this, he pleaded. No, I said. I don't, and I hung up the phone. An hour later, it rang again. This time it was Candace. Her approach was different, drenched in the sticky false sweetness I knew so well. Ivan, oh thank God. We've been so worried. When your number didn't work, we thought something terrible had happened. Mark is he's not himself. He's under so much pressure with the new job. This is all just a horrible, horrible misunderstanding. I waited. We can fix this, Ivan, she cooed. We can. You just need to release a statement. Say the magazine twisted your words. Say you were disoriented from the trip. People will understand. The sheer unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She wasn't apologizing. She was coaching me on how to lie for them. "Tell me, Candace," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Was I disoriented when you suggested I go into the diner alone? Was Mark disoriented when he drove the U-Haul onto the interstate? Or were you just in a hurry?" The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a liar with no more lies to tell. I waited a full 5 seconds, letting her squirm in it. Then I hung up and blocked both their numbers. The power had shifted. For 20 years, I had been the one waiting for their calls, hoping for their approval, dreading their displeasure. Now the roles were reversed. They were the ones who were desperate. They were the ones who were powerless. The feeling was as clean and bright as a shot of whiskey. The takeover was complete. The fallout was faster and more brutal than even I had anticipated. We had lit the fuse, and now we were watching the explosions from a safe distance. Mark's company in Portland, a tech startup that plastered its website with photos of its employees volunteering at soup kitchens and talked endlessly about its corporate family and community values, was in full-blown panic mode. The story was being shared all over Portland's social media. The optics of employing a man who literally dumped his father on the side of the road were, to put it mildly, not good. They placed him on indefinite administrative leave, which we all knew was just a prelude to him being fired once the storm died down. Candace's fate was even more poetic. As a self-employed yoga and wellness guru, her entire business was built on a personal brand of empathy and spiritual enlightenment. Her clients were mostly affluent, progressive women from the Portland suburbs. The story spread through their private Facebook groups and neighborhood email lists like a virus. Her classes emptied out overnight. Her clients, it turned out, did not want to be taught the path to inner peace by a woman who abandoned her father-in-law in a greasy spoon. She was professionally and socially radioactive. My phone, which had been silent for months, began to ring off the hook. But it wasn't Mark or Candace anymore. It was extended family. My cousin Beatrice from Florida, who hadn't called me in 5 years, suddenly wanted to know if I was okay. Her voice dripping with a concern that was a month too late. Mark's uncle, his mother's brother, called to try and broker a peace. "He's a good boy, Ivan," he'd said. "He just made a mistake." "Leaving a dog on the side of the road is a mistake," I told him. "Leaving your 75-year-old father is a decision. There's nothing to broker." I was polite, but I was firm. I didn't need their belated sympathy. Their silence when I was alone had been deafening, and I wasn't about to forget it. The climax came a week after the article was published. A hard, insistent knock on my front door. I looked through the peephole, and my heart gave a single hard jolt. It was Mark. He was standing on my porch in Chicago, looking like a ghost. He was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had lost weight. He had flown all the way back. I opened the door. We stood there for a moment, a universe of betrayal and anger separating us on the small concrete stoop. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. I stepped aside and let him into the sparsely furnished living room. He looked around at the cheap furniture, the empty walls. For a second I thought I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He started to talk, and it was a torrent of self-pity. "My life is ruined," he said, pacing back and forth. "Ruined. They're going to fire me. I know it. Candace has no clients. We might have to sell the house. Our dream, the life we were building, it's over. It's all gone." He finally stopped and looked at me, his eyes pleading. "All of this because you complained a little on a road trip, because you had to make a scene." I stared at the man who was my son, the boy I had raised, the person Helen had loved so fiercely, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold pity. He still didn't get it. He still thought he was the victim. "I didn't ruin your life, Mark," I said, and my voice was steady. The voice of a man who had nothing left to lose, and had found he had everything to gain. I just held up a mirror. "What you see in it, that's on you. The world didn't ruin your life. They're just reacting to what you did." I walked to the front door and opened it. You saw me as a burden, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. You thought I was disposable. I'm not. You were right about one thing, though. My big mistake. I did complain too much. For years I complained quietly to myself when I should have been organizing. I put up with the disrespect, the theft of my memories, the constant chipping away at my dignity. That was my mistake, and I've corrected it. He just stood there, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't comprehend a world that didn't revolve around his own needs. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, and I closed the door, shutting him out of my house and out of my life, for good. It wasn't a moment of anger or triumph. It was a moment of quiet, final clarity. The charade was over, and I was free. I heard later, through my cousin Beatrice, that Mark did lose his job. They couldn't sell the house in Portland right away because the market had cooled, and they were forced to move in with Candace's parents in California. I never heard from either of them directly again. The silence was a gift. There's no great joy in a son's ruin, no fist-pumping victory. There's just a clean, quiet space where all the noise and chaos used to be. A kind of peace I hadn't realized I was missing for 20 years. But this story isn't really about the end of my old family. It's about the beginning of my new one. The Left Behind became a phenomenon. The article in Nexus was just the start. Other news outlets picked up the story. We were interviewed on podcasts. A television news magazine did a segment. The donations started pouring in, not just from our members, but from strangers all over the country who were moved by our stories. With the new funds and the public platform, we got even more organized. We incorporated as a formal nonprofit organization. Arthur, our accountant, handled the finances. Margaret, our teacher, set up an outreach program. And me, I was back in my element. We established a national hotline, staffed by volunteers, other abandoned parents and empathetic supporters, to offer advice and a listening ear to people who were in the dark place we had all been. We partnered with legal aid societies to provide low-cost counsel for people fighting financial abuse. We created a real tangible support system. I'm on the board of directors now. We have video conferences every week, not as victims, but as leaders. We are a union of the discarded, a family forged in the fires of betrayal. My days are full. I'm busier now than I was in the last 10 years of my work at the Union Hall. I'm fighting for people again. I have a purpose. My son, in his spectacular selfish cruelty, didn't just abandon me at a diner. He gave me my life back. He thought he was getting rid of a burden, but what he really did was set me free. They say you can't choose your family. Maybe that's true, you are born into one. But you absolutely can choose who you give your loyalty, your energy, and your heart to. You can choose to walk away from the family that hurts you and build a new one that heals you. My son and his wife left me for dead on the side of the information superhighway. But in doing so, they introduced me to a whole community of people who understood. They gave me a new mission and a new family of thousands. So I guess in a strange, ironic way, I should probably thank him. He took everything from me, and in doing so, he gave me back myself. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or taken for granted, I want you to know that you are not alone. There is strength in numbers. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that message. And let us know in the comments below, what would you have done in my shoes? Is there a point where you say enough is enough? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary ways to fight back. Thank you for listening.